with Scott Allen.
Hello, I am your host, Scott Allen, and this is Phronesis, Practical Wisdom for Leaders. If the topic is leadership, I'm in. I've spent more than 20 years in the field teaching, learning, writing, and questioning. When I'm not working on Phronesis, I travel, delivering keynotes, working with individuals and teams, and helping people from organizations across industries become better leaders. Want to learn more? Visit me at scottjallen.net. Phronesis offers a smart, fast-paced discussion about all things leadership. We explore relevant topics and incorporate practical tips to help you make a difference in how you lead and live. Listen Notes lists Phronesis in the top 3% of podcasts worldwide. Phronesis is the official podcast of the International Leadership Association. ILA brings together those who teach, study, and develop leadership, advancing leadership knowledge and practice for a better world. Learn more at ila-net.org. Finally, if you enjoy Phronesis, please subscribe to stay current on our weekly episodes. If you find an episode that resonates, please share it with your colleagues and friends. And if you want more content, subscribe to my newsletter, The Leader's Edge. The link is in the show notes. As always, thanks for listening. And now, here's today's show.
Okay, everybody, welcome to the podcast, Practical Wisdom for Leaders. Thank you so much for checking in wherever you are in the world today. I have Dr. Amy Climer, and she is a thought leader in innovation, team development, and experiential learning. She teaches research-based practices, tools, and techniques to forward-thinking organizations such as the Mayo Clinic, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, and the University of Wisconsin. Amy holds a Ph.D. in Leadership and Change from Antioch University. Her research led to the Deliberate Creative Team Scale, designed to measure the 3 critical dimensions of team creativity. Her TEDx talk, The Power of Deliberate Creative Teams, explains her research and philosophies on innovation, and her book, Deliberate Creative Teams, How to Lead for Innovative Results, will be out in February 2025. Amy is the host of the Deliberate Creative podcast, and she lives in Asheville, North Carolina in the USA. Amy, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate your time. What's not in your bio that everyone needs to know about you?
Well, thanks, Scott, for having me on the show. There's a lot not in the bio, right? It's
Yes.
such a funny little snapshot of us. I think one thing is that I grew up, for lack of a better word, like the adult part of my life, the early adult part of my life was really focused on outdoor education and taking people out in the woods. I've worked for Outward Bound, actually still work for them, and I'm also on their board. That has really informed a lot of what I do today because it's about experience. And so lecturing has its place, but it's really about, hey, let's make this real. So I learned a lot from that.
And that gets really, really real when you're doing Outward Bound, and it's a 10-day excursion at times. I mean, some of those programs can get fairly long, right?
Yeah. Usually like 9-10 days is the minimum. And then some of them are 21, 28, even a semester long. Yeah.
Really, a semester long outdoor education experience. That is incredible. I've never heard of that.
Oh, it's amazing. Yeah. I have not led a semester. The longest I've done is 21 days. Which was good. I'm not aiming for the semester, but yeah, it's an amazing experience for the students. The one they do in North Carolina, it starts in North Carolina, then you go down to Florida, then you go to Patagonia down in Argentina. So you're getting
wow.
Experiences. Yeah.
Okay, so there's all these networks of trails throughout the United States. I always forget the names of these networks of trails, but you could probably just start the Appalachian Trail and just go all the way up to Maine and just have that be the semester.
You absolutely could. Yeah, because I think if you're doing it quickly, it's 3 months. Maybe some people do it in 2, but
yes, like that would be the best semester ever. Your physics professors walking alongside you, talking about equations, and you're just hiking.
Totally. I also spent a semester working for a program called Semester at Sea. Are you familiar with them?
Yes.
And it is like that. And you're on this huge ship and you're traveling around the world with your professors and visiting all these countries and you're learning physics or English or whatever it is. Yeah, super fun.
And then your professor's out at the pool, just hanging out, having a daiquiri after class.
There's a lot of sort of like blurred lines there. Okay, we're not in class, so you can have a drink.
That's so awesome. It's so fun to have you on. You are an expert in something I am not an expert in by any stretch of the imagination, but I have so much respect for your area of expertise. Your book, Deliberate Creative Teams, How to Lead for Innovative Results. It came out in February, and I think where I want to take the conversation, because I have not had a chance to read the book yet, Amy, what I would love to do is I want to explore a little bit. Let's entice the listeners. What do they need to know about the book? What's the impetus? And then what are 2 or 3 things that kind of stand out for you as why this is an important piece of work? Can we go that direction?
Sure, sounds great. So the book is for leaders who want their teams to be more creative, but they don't quite know where to start. The big premise of the book is that creativity or innovation is a system. If you want to be more creative, I introduce a system or model that you can follow, and it works. We've known actually since the 1970s that creativity training works. In fact, and one of the things that I stumbled upon in the book, and this is like one of these like geeky research points, but in the late 1970s, I think it was, there was a study, a meta-analysis of 142 studies. They looked at all these studies that were saying, hey, does creativity training work? And they found that it does work. So like, wait, we knew this all the way back to the 1970s and we're still barely doing it?
Yeah.
That's the big picture premise, that creativity is a system.
Okay. And you have the Deliberate Creative Team System that you have in the book. Tell us a little bit about it.
It's a 3-circle Venn diagram, if that helps you visualize. And there are 3 critical elements or critical dimensions that teams need if they want to be creative together. Those are team purpose, team dynamics, and team creative process. First, I'll just back up and say the reason I even studied this or figured this out is I had these experiences, and you probably have had these too, Scott, where I had been on many teams in my career,
Sure.
And some of them were super creative, where I felt like we were doing this awesome work. We were being really innovative. The meetings were fun. I was engaged. And then there was the other teams where I felt like I just sat down at the table and I became less creative just being there. Like it was so dry. And I did spend the beginning of my career at universities. So you probably know like the committees.
Oh, yes.
Yes, right. Every once in a while, though, some of them are really good. And I was curious, what's the difference? Because oftentimes there was overlap, not just me, but some other colleagues. So that was really the driver of how come some teams are creative and others aren't.
Yeah.
And so I dug into this research and came up with these 3 elements that teams need. And when I look back, I'm like, oh, yeah, those teams that weren't creative, we didn't have those 3 elements there.
Okay, so team purpose.
Yeah, should we get into them?
Yeah, let's do that. Unless you want to start somewhere different than team purpose.
Yeah, I mean, it's at the top. It's also, the good thing is it's the one that most teams do have figured out. Not all, but team purpose basically just means that we have a shared purpose that we all understand, we all are interested in, we all buy into it. It could be as simple as a short conversation. Hey, does everybody know what our team purpose is? And then you're talking through that. It doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be a fancy mission statement or a charter, but it's just, we all know why we're here and we're all kind of heading in the same direction.
Okay.
So that's team purpose.
Yeah.
Team dynamics is the behaviors and interactions between team members. So how do you show up in a team meeting? What are your conversations like? How do you show up in the hallway after the meeting or before? Specifically underneath team dynamics is trust, our ability to trust each other, at least at a moderate level.
Sure.
I don't need to trust my team members as much as I trust my wife.
Yes.
But at least I'm comfortable enough that I can put some ideas out on the table and not be worried about being smacked down by it. So moderate level of trust. Communication, we can communicate well with each other. That one's pretty obvious. And then that we can engage in a type of conflict called creative abrasion, where we can disagree around the ideas around the work, but we're not disagreeing due to personality or identity.
I like that phrasing.
Yeah, that comes from Jerry Hirschberg, who was one of the leaders with Nissan, and he was charged with this challenge of meshing the Japanese culture and the American culture in order to create higher quality, more innovative cars. And he realized that if we're not having any disagreement, that's a problem.
Yes.
And obviously, too much disagreement, then you're not getting anything done, right? So, yeah, creative abrasion.
Awesome.
And then the last circle there in that Venn diagram is team creative process. And that's the process, the tools, the techniques that you're using to actually be creative together. And that's the circle that most teams don't even think about.
Say more about that. Let's go into that one a little bit. This is really interesting.
Have you heard of design thinking?
I have. Yeah.
Okay, that's an example of a creative process. There's many of them out there. Design thinking, creative problem solving, human-centered design. There's one called TRIZ that comes out of Russia. They're all very similar and they're all good. In my opinion, it doesn't matter a whole lot which one you use. But the key here is to use something.
Yes.
To have some sort of clear process that your team wants to actually solve a problem and use creativity. Don't just show up at meetings and talk about it. Like actually follow these stages. The output will then be more innovative. Process that I teach most often of all those I listed is creative problem solving.
Okay.
It's the one that I think it's very accessible, it's easy to understand, and it's based on how we as humans approach problems naturally. And all of the different processes are based on that more or less. So here's creative problem solving. 4 stages. You've done this before, whether you realize it or not. First stage is clarify. What's the problem? What's going on? From there, when you give a clear sense of what the real problem is, you generate ideas. So you ideate. Once you have a bunch of ideas, you're going to select the top ones and then you're going to develop them further. So develop is a 3rd stage. And then take those developed ideas into implementation. And that's the last stage. So clarify, ideate, develop, implement. Very simple. We've all done this. The challenge we have as humans is that we each have a preference for one or more of those areas.
So like I like to exist in one of these phases a little more than the others.
Yeah. And there's an assessment tool called Foresight that measures which of these stages is your favorite. Which ones do you gravitate towards? So I know that I am a high ideator and a high implementer.
Okay.
So what happens for me is if I have a problem, I just want to jump right in with ideas. But really what's better is if I can just slow down a bit, better understand what the real problem is. Because you know how it is. Sometimes you think the problem is, at one point at A and it's really at B or C. And if you solve for A, you have done nothing.
Yep.
This happens all the time.
Yes.
And even 5 minutes can make a difference. Like 5 minutes of clarifying can change how you approach the problem. So my tendency is to skip clarifying, and I've learned just slow down, ask a few questions, and then I can go to my favorite stage, which is ideate. Love ideation. And then, I have an idea and I'm like, cool, let's go, let's get started. And then I usually trip over myself because I don't know what to do because I haven't developed any of the solution, right? And so that's where you're developing your plan or your approach. And it's interesting for me. I have found that if I'm procrastinating, almost always it's because the next thing I need to do is develop. And that feels a little draining to me.
Ah.
And so if I can just sit down and, all right, I'm going to just work through this. Sometimes it's only 15 minutes. It doesn't have to be a long time. And then I can move forward.
I just really, really appreciate this conversation because for years, Amy, I've even done sessions on creative problem solving. And I wasn't in any way intentionally using this process. Maybe a variation of define the problem. Let's choose several ideas or potential paths forward. But I just love the fact that, okay, so there's these, it's almost, I think of like the Suzuki method of learning the cello or the violin. There's all these different flavors of how we can get to the process we can use. It really depends on what is the process you prefer or what's the process we agree upon. And then we follow this process. And do you find that the process, as long as there's awareness of individuals and maybe their styles where they like to spend their time a little bit more, and we can have that kind of creative abrasion, I believe was the phrasing that you used, and that the processes oftentimes yield the desired results. What do you think? The process, is it really just, if we follow this, we're going to get to, generally speaking, a good place?
Yes. And there's all this research that backs it up.
Really?
If you follow the creative process, you will be more creative. I don't even know how many studies there are on that, but hundreds. And it breaks my heart a little bit that we aren't more intentional in teaching this because it's so accessible if it's broken down well.
Yep.
And we need it so badly. I think just as a country, as a world, and we are naturally, as humans, we are very creative. We're very innovative. The fact that we're even like having a podcast conversation from different states, like humans made all of this, right? Like
Yes.
we're very capable. And there's a lot of problems we have on this planet that I believe we have the human capacity to solve if we can tap into our creativity and if we can collaborate well. A couple of years ago, maybe a little more than that, a few years ago, I watched this film called Where There Once Was Water. And
Okay.
it's the main photographer is Brittany App, who happens to be somebody I know. She's an amazing photographer, amazing videographer. And so she did this whole film about the water crisis in California, which I know very little about because I live in Asheville, North Carolina, where there is plenty of water. In fact, sometimes too much water. And so I'm watching this film, and the biggest thing that struck me was, wow, there are plenty of solutions available. We're just not actually collaborating enough and working together enough to implement these solutions at scale. I think about, wow, if there were teams and organizations that could use this deliberate creative system of team purpose, team dynamics, team creative process, and they could work better together, and just think of the problems we could solve.
Yeah. Well, and like so many other topics, I don't know that we're training leaders to guide their teams through this process. Again, if I've been studying this topic for 20 years, leadership, right, and been really immersed in it and love it, and this is
Yeah.
one of the first times I'm hearing about the more of the formal study of problem solving, right, in the process. I mean, I've read the literature of Paul Nutt, and I know that you know Paul Nutt from Ohio State and some of his decision-making studies, which kind of dances around some of what you've just said of why people make bad decisions. Oftentimes they didn't do some of what you just said.
Yeah.
But again, it fascinates me because to your point, just a lot of bad decisions are being made. You've been in the meeting where you walk in and you think it's maybe a brainstorming session, but the individual who's in authority knows what they want to do. There's a little theatrical performance, and then we 45 minutes later walk out and it wasn't a team system at all.
Yes. Actually, in the book, I wrote a little short vignette about that. Early in my career, I was working at a university, which I won't mention, but we were talking about before we started recording. The unit that I worked in was excellent. I had a great team, loved the team that I worked with. And one day, the dean came to our team meeting and he said, oh, hey, I'm here because I want to talk to you about this thing we're doing. And I'd love to get your input and your ideas. I was like, oh, cool. So he starts explaining a little bit more of what he's looking for. And I'm kind of a doodler. So I'm doodling, I'm taking some notes, jotting down some thoughts that I have. About 15 minutes in, I look across the table at a friend of mine who's also in the team. And I'm like trying not to laugh. Like we make eye contact. And when I can tell we're both thinking, when is this guy going to stop talking? He said he wanted ideas from us. And I had to look away. I was about to burst out laughing. And then, no kidding, Scott, 55 minutes in, he was still talking. He wraps it up and he says, thank you so much. I really appreciate all your input. And then he left.
I have really appreciated this conversation with you all. You have great ideas.
Thank you for letting me pontificate for 55 minutes.
Or another version of that meeting is at minute 55, the person's like, well, what do you all think? You know? We just let us out of this room. We don't, but you always have that one person in the room who keeps it going.
Like, you clearly don't really want our ideas, so why go through the motions?
Exactly. What else? Observations, maybe clarifications in your own mind. The process of writing a book is so fascinating. Are there a couple other things that you want listeners to know about just even your own observations or a piece of content that you thought was really fun and innovative? Just what stands out for you?
I think the biggest thing that will be helpful for leaders is to think about the deliberate or lack of that they're approaching creativity or innovation. Actually, maybe before that is, do you want to be creative?
Yeah.
Most people say they do, and then very few actually do anything about it.
Hmm.
I'm talking about the organizational level, but of course, this could apply personally as well. In a team, in an organization, I think it'd be really helpful to look at, what are you doing to be more creative? What are your team meetings like? Do you have a structure for generating ideas? I often ask even teams that are considered creative, like the creative marketing team, I'll ask them, what process do you use to generate ideas? Sometimes they'll say, we do have brainstorming sessions. Sometimes they look at me like I have two heads.
Hmm.
Even if they say they use a brainstorming session, I'll say, okay, what techniques are you using? And then they'll be like, what do you mean? We just brainstorm. Oh, okay. Which makes sense because that is what everybody knows, right? But brainstorming is one technique, and there are many techniques to generating new ideas. We can really get deep into the research on brainstorming, but it works in some contexts. It's not always the best approach.
Yeah, I saw some studies recently about, you can validate this if it's true or not. Listeners might be interested in, but oftentimes it's more effective, and this is generalizing, if people come in having responded to some things and they come in with their ideas already. It's not like an on the spot discussion, because we can be free a little bit from bias or authority or some other things. Is that accurate? Is that what you're talking about?
That's one of the pieces. Yeah. If people know in advance what the conversation's about, what the topic's about, that is definitely helpful. And even just one simple thing that leaders could do is, do you have an agenda for your team meetings?
Yeah.
I would say it's like half and half, at least the clients that I work with. Many of them do, but also many of them don't. Even that, just, hey, we're going to have this conversation around X topic, and what we're really looking for in this conversation is ideas. Or we're having, and then we're say like, okay, week one, we're going to have a conversation about ideas. And then the following week, we're going to come back and we're going to take those best ideas and develop them further. And then the fourth week, we're going to look at, what are we actually going to do?
Hmm.
And actually, of course, there in my just that example, I skipped clarify because I tend to skip clarify. So really week one would be really just talking about the problem. And usually in teams, when you start talking about the problem, people say, well, what we should do is da 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 da. Well, instead say, okay, all we're doing is understanding the problem. You can't offer any ideas. We're only looking at understanding it for
Yeah.
15 minutes. And that alone is going to shift a lot.
Because those folks whose minds quickly, they want to jump and exist in that space. And so here's a quick question for you. What are the different approaches people use to get to those ideas that make the cut, so to speak? Any research around that on the best practices? I imagine at times the leader just chooses. I think of a creative process like on Saturday Night Live. I think Lauren Michaels stands at the board and kind of decides which skits are going to get on.
Yeah.
Just that, the leader decides. But are there voting systems that have been shown to be the best? How does that work?
I think that actually there's obviously a lot of different approaches, right? And one of them where the leader decides may be completely appropriate. And in other cases, maybe it's the team that makes that decision. Either way, what's most important is the people in the room know which method it's going to be in advance.
Ah.
I think what is so demoralizing is when a team thinks that they're making a collective decision. And so they go through this conversation and they have that in their mind. And then at the end, the leader says, okay, thanks, I'm going to make the decision now. And that's okay if the leader's going to make the decision, as long as they say that up front, like, I want to have this conversation. At the end of the conversation, I'm going to choose, but help me think through this.
Yes.
Fully appropriate. Now, if it is going to be a collective decision, and there's even layers to this, but if it's going to be more of a collective input, then, okay, let's say you've got 50 ideas up on the wall. I'm a big fan of Post-it notes. So you get your ideas on Post-it notes. They're all up on the wall.
Yep.
And then I often will give leaders, team members, just like 3 to 5 little stickers, like sticky dots. And I'll just say, okay, you have, if I do 4, everybody has 4 dots. You can think of this as 4 quarters. You can put your money wherever you want. If there's an idea you're super excited about, you can put all 4 on that one. If you think you want to spread it out and vote on 4 different ideas, that's fine too. However you want to place your bets, right? And then from there, okay, let's say you got 10 team members, each have 4 stickers. So you have 40 different dots on the, most likely many of them have several dots. And then you look at, okay, what are those that are the highest ranking? I don't actually care which is the highest.
Yeah.
I just want to pull what are the top 5 ideas. And let's take all of those top 5 ideas into the develop stage, spend a little bit time on each one, developing them, and then make that decision. Don't make that decision right away, because when an idea first comes out of our mouths, it's usually about as developed with as what will fit on a Post-it note.
Yeah.
It's like a couple sentences, like there's not much to it. So how can you decide if it's any good yet? So I'm a big fan of, using that sticker dot method just to see what rises up and then pull those aside, dig into those, and then make that final decision.
But even as you were just speaking, it really highlighted for me why it's critical that pre-work is being done, because I think probably where a lot of leaders find themselves, at least I've been in these meetings, Amy, you likely have as well, where the leader didn't really set it up well with parameters. Like, we're probably not adding staff. We're probably not giving everybody a 10% raise next year. You have to couch that first part really well so that the ideas that are elevating and emerging are within the constraints of what we're working in. Otherwise, now you do have to be the bad person to say, we aren't going to do 7 of those 10 ideas you just had.
Okay. I want to push back on this a little bit.
Please.
Okay. So I do, obviously there's parameters, right? There has to be. However, it can be helpful to not set those up in advance and actually just set those up at a different stage.
Okay.
So, all right. So when you're generating those ideas, there's some classic brainstorming guidelines that you may have heard before. And these, by the way, brainstorming comes from this guy, Alex Osborne, from 1948. He published this little book called Your Creative Power. In that book, he described what he called the storming of the minds, where people come together, they generate these ideas. And that book basically went viral in the 1940s, 50s. And so 300,000 copies, which is great. He's also happens to be credited with the person who developed the creative problem solving process.
Okay.
Anyway, so his guidelines that he created, we still use today, that when you're in a brainstorming session, basically you want to suspend judgment. So we're not judging the ideas yet. We will get to that. And judging the ideas is very important, but just not in this initial phase. So suspend judgment, build on each other's ideas, combine and build on ideas, go for wacky ideas, wild ideas, whatever you got. And then the fourth one is aim for quantity, because quantity leads to quality. 50 to 100 ideas in a short brainstorming session or short ideation session is very realistic.
Okay.
After those ideas are created, then taking those best ones and developing them. And in that develop stage, no idea is perfect, right? So maybe the idea is like, gosh, we really need another staff member.
Yeah.
Your budget's what your budget is. We don't have more money for a staff person. So then in the develop stage, you're asking some more questions like, how might we bring in another staff person given our limited budget?
Okay.
So maybe you get a corporate sponsor to fund the staff person. Maybe you do some sort of trade with another organization. I mean, there's like a zillion ideas you could come up with, which how you could fund that staff person that might be the perfect solution to the problem.
Okay.
But if you limit it up front, it's not going to happen.
Okay. So
does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense. And so then at some point, the leader's going to have to say, we're working within these constraints. How could we potentially make it happen? How could this work? Fascinating.
Yes. And actually, another thing I would suggest, instead of saying, how could we make it work? It's how might we make this work?
Okay.
The word might, I like to say might is a mighty word. It's really powerful. And so to move from how could we, how should we, how will we, to how might we, it's now inviting this sense of possibility, where if you ask me, how should we do this? I know you're looking for the one right answer.
Mm.
But if you say, how might we do this? Oh, you're looking for a few ideas. Okay.
Yeah.
And my brain just responds differently with that one little word.
Yeah. It keeps me in a place of multiple potential. That's fascinating.
Yeah, it's really fun.
Amy, Anything else before we begin to wind down that you want listeners to know about the work?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is just think about it and
Yeah.
look at how might you change what you're doing to help your team be more creative.
Hmm.
In the book, Deliberate Creative Teams, I have lots of activities and techniques that leaders can use that they can implement like really the next day in their meetings.
Well, and it's a critical topic that, again, is not given the time that it's due, likely. And it's so incredibly important because the quality of decisions we're making have incredible ramifications for our teams, for our organizations. It's a fascinating topic. So I love that you're bringing this to the fore. I'm going to put for listeners a whole bunch of links in the show notes. So you'll have a link to Amy's TED Talk. You'll have a link to the book. You'll have a link to other resources that we have discussed. Wouldn't that be cool to be the guy who coined the term brainstorming? Now you know, everybody. This is cool stuff. So I always, Amy, wind down our conversations by asking a question, and that is, what have you been reading, listening to, streaming, consuming? What's caught your attention in recent times? It could have something to do with what we've just discussed. It may have nothing to do with what we've just discussed, but what's kept your mind cooking lately?
Oh my gosh, there's always so many things. I just started reading the book. In fact, I'm only a chapter or two in the book Awe.
Hmm.
Have you heard this book?
No.
The subtitle is The New Science of Everyday Wonder and How It Can Transform Your Life.
Okay.
And it's really about, how just this concept of where we're amazed by something, you see the northern lights or this beautiful sunset and how we're just like, oh, wow, this is amazing. And it's about finding that in the everyday. And I guess there's a strong connection between awe and, don't quote me on this, but it's like happiness or being, and
Okay.
our ability to find that awe can really increase our well-being.
So cool. I just had a conversation yesterday about gratitude and some of the
Yeah,
benefits of, and so it feels like a little bit of a close cousin. Like
totally.
in those seemingly mundane moments, can I just be overwhelmed with a sense of gratitude? There's a lot happening in that. And so I think of this awe. I'll look into that. I'll put a link to the show notes in there. I need to read your book first before I read awe.
Yeah, check out Deliberate Creative Teams.
I do. Amy, thank you so much for being. We'll do it again. We'll have another conversation. This is so much fun because I think it's a topic that I have not covered on this podcast. It's a topic that's critical to effective leadership. And so you are helping leaders be more successful. I am on board with that. That's awesome. Thanks for your good work. Thanks for being with me today. How fun was that conversation? And of course, I do admit in there, I've been leading problem-solving sessions for years, but admittedly, I have not explored that literature to the level I probably should have. I have been in design thinking sessions. I have been in creative problem-solving sessions. But am I an expert in actually leading that process? I think no. Is it critical that leaders are able to lead that process? Yes, very critical. It's kind of, in part, their jam, being able to identify our best path forward, especially with a number of these complex adaptive challenges that organizations are confronting. So, creative problem solving. Go pick up Amy's book. Mine is in the mail, and I am excited to jump in, and I'm excited to explore and learn. Take care, everyone. I appreciate you. Amy, I appreciate you. Bye-bye. You have just finished another episode of Practical Wisdom for Leaders with Scott Allen. To contact me, visit scottjallen.net or send me a note at scott@scottjallen.net. I'm also on LinkedIn, so let's connect. If you have feedback, I'd love to hear it. And as always, thank you so much for listening. And now here's my daughter, Emily, with the outro.
You've been listening to Phronesis, Practical Wisdom with Scott Allen.